Okay. Good morning. The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and Intelligence will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony from 3 national law enforcement associations regarding the importance of information sharing and ongoing challenges. And I'd like to personally welcome the members of the subcommittee, express my appreciation to the witnesses who traveled here today. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here. And now I recognize myself for an opening statement. Nearly 19 months ago, this subcommittee held a hearing entitled Addressing the Remaining Gaps in Federal, State, and Local Information Sharing. We heard from the same impressive panel that's before us again today, and a lot has happened since then. During the initial hearing, the witnesses raised a number of important issues, including the need for cyber expertise within state and local law enforcement, providing fusion centers with greater access to FBI terrorism-related data, and concerns about the impact of encrypted communications platforms for law enforcement and counterterrorism investigations. A number of specific recommendations for the Department of Homeland Security were also raised, such as providing greater access to security clearances, empowering INA field personnel, and expanding the Homeland Security Information Network, just to name a few. A number of the recommendations became legislative proposals that passed the House last year and are pending before the Senate. We've asked the witnesses to reconvene to provide an update on the status of these issues and highlight any additional challenges that need continued attention, especially in light of the administration transition next year. A cop or sheriff's deputy on patrol, an analyst reviewing a suspicious activity report, or a first responder interacting with the public carrying out their daily responsibilities are most likely going to be the first to identify a possible threat. In the event of a terrorist attack, they will be the first to respond. While carrying out critical security and public safety missions, U.S. law enforcement is facing an increased threat environment. Since September 11, 2001, there have been 166 plots within the United States linked to Islamist terror groups, with the vast majority occurring since 2009. In May, during FBI Director Comey stated that the Bureau has over 800 open cases related to individuals in the U.S. with links to ISIS, and I believe he said they're in all 50 states. So that's 800 open cases in 50 states of U.S. individuals linked to ISIS. The terror group has called for attacks against law enforcement directly. In January 2015, a statement from the ISIS spokesman called on supporters to, quote, rise up and kill intelligence officers, police officers, soldiers, and civilians. In March 2016, the Caliphate Cyber Army, CCA, a cyber group believed to be the ISIS hacking division, released a kill list with names and information on 32 police officers from across Minnesota. During the same time period, CCA published personal information of 55 New Jersey transit officers and encouraged lone wolf attacks against the officers. Also troubling is the increase in domestic threats against law enforcement. In some tragic instances, these threats have turned into violence. The National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund website reports there have been 11 shooting ambush attacks on law enforcement in 2016 to date. On July 7, 2016, a gunman killed 5 police officers in Dallas and 7 other individuals while on duty providing security at a protest rally. 3 police officers were killed in an ambush attack on Sunday, July 17, 2016, in Baton Rouge. The attacker had made statements supporting attacks against law enforcement on the social media accounts. In the past several months, there have been recurring open-source media reports that suggest multiple police departments must respond to social media threats against law enforcement officials in hundreds of jurisdictions across the U.S. I'm concerned about this anti-law enforcement climate, and it adds to the dangerous nature of your jobs. Also, it involves going after terrorism and providing counterterrorism service. I want to offer my personal appreciation, admiration, and support to the law enforcement, intelligence analysts, and first responders represented by your associations for the vital work they carry out every day, and I look forward to your update. I want to especially thank Mr. Senna, Chief Berry, and Dr. Alexander for being here today. The input from your respective associations is critical to our understanding of what has to be done, and you've been there, you know what it's about, and your testimony will be extremely valuable to us. And now I recognize my good friend, the ranking minority member from New York, and for you who worked in Rochester and Albany, he's from Buffalo. He's a little closer to the part of New York that you're familiar with, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank the chairman for holding this hearing for his leadership on this issue. It's a follow-up to the hearing first held in the 114th Congress. I would also like to thank the witnesses for traveling here to be with us again today. Today, only a few days from the 15th anniversary of the attacks on September 11th, 2001, we know now, unfortunately, that information sharing is an integral part of our nation's security. The idea and the practice of information sharing between federal, state, and local law enforcement officials has been firmly ingrained in our Homeland Security policies since 9/11. Our lessons learned have pushed the federal government to develop many initiatives expanding efforts at information sharing with state and local partners. Today, we have many examples of successful partnerships, such as the Fusion Centers and the National Joint Terrorism Task Force. However, our work in this area is not complete. The primary intelligence mission remains collecting information and providing accurate analysis in a timely manner. The challenge becomes balancing the environment where competitive information sharing thrives while eliminating unnecessary duplication. That has and remains the challenge for law enforcement officials and its partners. As members of Congress, we have an important role today. When we met here in February of 2015, we were recovering from a historic government shutdown. Now, 1.5 years later, we are days away from another government shutdown with the Department of Homeland Security funding and ultimately funding for our state and locals looming in the balance. So while I applaud the open and candid dialogue, funding uncertainty trickles down and impacts all of the issues we have gathered here to discuss. Moreover, the recent and ongoing attacks against law enforcement highlight the fact that the true value of information sharing will never be realized if state and local law enforcement officials cannot respond and protect their own communities. At our last meeting, I encouraged intelligence and law enforcement officers to integrate themselves into jurisdictions and communities that they are assigned, and in order to know and understand geographical and cultural sensitivities. Today, I would again encourage the same thing. So while today's hearing topics are not new, they present issues that we cannot afford to ignore. This type of open dialogue is beneficial to all parties involved and helps to inform the decisions that we make as a collective body. Again, I welcome you back here before this committee, and I look forward to your testimony. And I yield back.
Ranking member yields back, and I want to welcome our witnesses. Just remind Ms. Katko, if he has a statement to make to the record, you can submit it later. Okay, thank you. Our first witness today will be Chief Berry. Chief Richard Berry is immediate past president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police and served as the president during the first subcommittee hearing in February 2015. He served for 30 years as a law enforcement officer in Florida, including as chief of police for the city of Lake Mary. In 2007, he was appointed chief of police for the University of Central Florida. Throughout his years of service, he has twice been awarded the Medal of Valor, performance undertaken at great personal hazard. Obviously, he had the Orlando tragedy occurred within his jurisdiction, and we look forward to anything you have to say about that. But again, thank you for your testimony when you were here in the past. We look forward to your testimony again this morning. Thank you for your service, and you're recognized.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman King and members of the subcommittee, for inviting me to testify back in front of you again. As you know, I was here on February 26th of 2015, and I sat before many of you in this room, and we talked about some very important issues, and I appreciate you reconvening so that we can follow up on those issues. Over a year ago, I spoke about issues such as going dark, the encryption that the chairman spoke about, which is only getting worse, the integral role of the National Fusion Center network, which is critical to how we do business, and how things have advanced since 9/11 in information sharing, because we have had some incredible gains, and we can never forget that. While there is no doubt that our fusion centers remain absolutely essential, and law enforcement still faces great challenges, even with legal authority on gaining access to electronic communication pursuant to a court order, I would like to focus on a few other issues today. Those issues are terrorist attacks and information sharing around incidents like the Pulse nightclub shooting, cyber threats, and federal funding. During my career, 39 years, I've watched the threats to our communities evolve. While we are still dealing with the problems of violent crime, drugs, prostitution, smuggling, trafficking, and gangs, we now face additional challenges. Those challenges include violent extremism, terrorism, cyber threats, and highly organized criminals with access to specialized equipment to aid them in their mission to harm others and devastate our communities. June 12, 2016, 2:03 a.m. It's a day I will not forget. It was in the early hours of June 12th that Omar Mateen, which normally I don't identify the shooters, but I will in this case, killed 49 people and wounded countless others inside the Pulse nightclub in downtown Orlando. 49 people lost their lives, and 53 others were wounded. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for incredible medical care that was close by, those numbers would have been even higher. Members of my agency were first responders to this horrific scene, and our victim advocates assisted family members at 3 local hospitals. Now, 3 months later, we continue to provide counseling services to victims and their families as they work to restore some type of normalcy to their lives while the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force continues the criminal investigation. This Pulse incident highlights how one heavily armed individual can inflict numerous casualties with weapons purchased legally here in the United States. As law enforcement continues to deal with radicalized people and groups, there is a growing concern about refugees from war-torn countries coming to our country. Thus far, we have not been informed how they will be vetted or where they will be located. Our need to know is not about targeting or trafficking, but more in line with assistance during assimilation and protecting these individuals from people in communities with ill intent. Another issue of significance is cyber threats. The cyber threat confronting the United States has never been greater. The cyber threat is real, it's here, and it's now. It seems as though we read or hear about cybercrime and cyber attacks against government agencies, businesses, and critical infrastructure every single week in the media. However, cybersecurity is not just a national level challenge. It affects state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement agencies every day. These agencies encounter issues ranging from cyber-enabled crime committed against local individuals and businesses to forensic cyber investigations to protecting against and responding to cybercrime, cyber attack, and intrusions. Police departments themselves have become the target of ransomware attacks, which threatens our operations and the security of our information systems and data. Please keep in mind that nearly 3/4 of the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this country are small, with fewer than 25 sworn officers. This means many of the nation's law enforcement agencies do not have robust IT systems, and protecting their systems from intrusions is a challenge. Therefore, we cannot and must not overlook the importance of fully engaging smaller agencies and non-urban agencies in cybersecurity exercises, training, and threats. I would also recommend that the FBI consider adding cybercrime reporting to the Uniform Crime Reporting System. During my 39 years in government experience, it has shown me that for something to become a priority, we have to count it first. And if we don't count it, it's not important to us. It should come as no surprise to members of this committee, but federal funding is essential to our efforts, from high-intensity drug trafficking to the fusion centers and all the resources that connect the dots so that law enforcement can be effective. On behalf of the IACP and our more than 27,000 members in 132 countries, Chairman, thank you for allowing me to be here again, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Chief Perry, thank you for your testimony, and again, thank you for being here once more and for your service over the years. Our next witness is Mike Senna, who is the director of the North California Regional Intelligence Center, the Fusion Center for the San Francisco Bay Area. He also currently serves as president of the National Fusion Center Association, representing 77 state and local fusion centers that comprise the national network of fusion centers. Mr. Senna also has testified before this committee on numerous occasions and continues to be a great resource to the committee. We thank you for that, and we appreciate you being here again today. And now you're recognized. You've been here. I don't have to tell you how to do it. You're the pro.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ranking Member Higgins, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to testify again on this important topic. I'm proud to represent the professionals across the National Network of Fusion Centers. And since we met in February of 2015, we've seen good information sharing progress. But we've also been reminded that gaps still exist. At the end of the day, it's about meeting the needs and expectations of the American people, and also that we keep them safe while respecting their rights. Fusion centers are at the forefront of removing barriers, developing better pathways, and maintaining relationships that help analysis and sharing happen faster. The role of fusion centers in the aftermath of attacks in San Bernardino, Orlando, Baton Rouge, and other places are clear examples of that. Fusion centers are routinely deconflicting investigative cases today, thanks to support of DHS, the PMISC, and our partners at the Risk Watch Centers and HIDAs across the country. That means that we have better visibility into active investigations around the country, and it means our officers are safer. We're working to standardize the process for exchanging requests for information, or RFIs, among fusion centers and our partners through HISN Exchange. This will help the flow of information and help track the responses. In the wake of high-profile attacks in recent months, suspicious activity reports, SARS, forwarded to fusion centers rose sharply. Some people send information directly to the FBI. Most people call 911 or their local law enforcement agency. Thanks to the ever-growing network of liaison officers, those reports are routinely forwarded to fusion centers. Our analysts work with DHS and FBI partners to vet those reports, provide local context around the information, and submit them to the FBI's eGuardian system as appropriate. Since the beginning of fiscal year 2016 through the end of July, fusion centers have received thousands of SARs from the public. We saw a massive uptick in November and December after the Paris and San Bernardino attacks. So far, for FY16, more than 100 of those SARs have contributed to existing FBI investigations or resulted in the initiation of a new investigation, and many of those were connected to individuals on the terror watch list. That is a clear indication of the enhanced reporting, analysis, and sharing that happens through fusion centers. You can also find encouraging evidence of the progress in the newly published 2016 annual report from the Program Manager for the Information Sharing Environment, or PMISC. If members of this committee have not yet reviewed that report, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's available online at isc.gov, and I'd like to submit it for the record. In my written statement, I lay out in more detail the challenges we are facing, but I want to highlight some of them here. We have consistently called for more TS-SCI clearances for appropriate fusion center personnel. Without those clearances, the types of information our people are able to factor into their analysis can be inadequate, and sensitive information that should be shared is not shared. We have strong concerns about the impact of federal FOIA interpretations on the legal ability of state and local law enforcement to share our information and intelligence with our federal partners. We need better standards around law enforcement sensitive information, or LES information. Currently, there is no clear definition of LES information and no penalties for unlawful and unauthorized release, I should say, of that data. We have to share most information at the FOIA LES level so it gets to the people who need it, which can still reveal sensitive information about ongoing investigations, jeopardize cases, and the lives of law enforcement personnel. Yet there is no way to enforce or penalize violations. We also believe that the FBI should explore the inclusion of fusion centers in its threat review prioritization process to ensure more complete understanding of the threats facing our nation. Right now, several fusion centers are unable to access criminal justice information databases through CJIS. We're also unable to gain access to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, and that challenge also exists with our other partners at risk centers and HIDAs. I'm very concerned that some of our federally funded programs, whose mission clearly includes providing investigative support, cannot get access to data that is fundamental to good analytical work. It is a clear obstacle to information sharing and analysis, and we need to address it. Finally, we're working with the FBI on an enhanced engagement initiative to ensure the FBI continues to improve its sharing of relevant counterterrorism information with fusion centers. It will also improve coordination among fusion centers to address the growing terrorism threat. We're working closely with our partners at DHS, PMISC, and the Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council on this project. I want to congratulate and thank this committee for its productive legislation during the 114th Congress. You've moved several pieces of legislation that would make it a positive difference to fusion centers and the American public. We strongly encourage the Senate to consider those bills. Next month, we will hold our Fusion Center Training Conference in Alexandria, Virginia. I'd like to invite members and staff of this committee to attend the conference to see up close the challenges we're addressing and the level of collaboration that has become routine. Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Senator, and I'll certainly pass on your comments regarding the legislation to Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Thompson. This is a bipartisan committee, and again, they will certainly appreciate, as I do, the comments you made, and I know the Ranking Member does, and also Chairman Katko, who's chairman of the subcommittee as well. Our next witness is a true expert in law enforcement, Dr. Cedric Alexander. He's the national president for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. He also serves as chief of police for DeKalb County. Previously, Dr. Alexander was the federal security director for the Transportation Security Administration at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. He also served, and now we have our New York issue, as Deputy Commissioner of the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services, Chief of Police in the Rochester Police Department, one of the outstanding departments in the state, and held several leadership roles at the University of Rochester Department of Psychiatry in New York. Dr. Alexander began his law enforcement career in 1977 and also served with the Miami-Dade Police Department and was a law enforcement officer in Florida for 15 years. Dr. Alexander, thank you for being here again today. Thank you for your career of service, and now we recognize you for your testimony.
Yeah, thank you very much as well, Chairman. Chairman King, Ranking Member Higgins and Thompson, and members of the subcommittee, I bring you greetings on behalf of the great state of Georgia and law enforcement throughout the state of Georgia and the community in which I live as well. I speak to you, of course, from 40 years of law enforcement experience and have been privileged to hold a number of high positions both in federal, state, county, and local government over the course of my career. As we review the past year and a half, attacks such as those in San Bernardino, Orlando, and Dallas provide lenses by which we as a nation, and in particular federal, state, and local law enforcement, must continue efforts to improve information sharing, understanding, confront new and emerging threats, and ask ourselves what more needs to be done. Let me talk a little bit about the improvements that we have seen over the last year from where I sit, sir. Improvements in information sharing among law enforcement agencies at the federal, state, and local level have improved since February 2015. Efforts to declassify intelligence has helped federal authorities share pertinent information more readily, which assists state and local law enforcement prepare and respond to emerging threats. Co-locating the Georgia Information Sharing and Analysis Center with FBI staff encourage more efficient sharing and fusion of information and intelligence. As noted in February 2015, this fusion center and other local partnerships, task force, and meetings with state and federal agencies facilitate information flow, but are still relationship-driven and systems remain decentralized. Cooperation and information sharing between federal and state law enforcement, as well as other private sector partners, are supported through several strategic plans and directives, which are 2014 to 2017, the National Strategy for the National Network of Fusion Centers seeks to connect with the intelligence community, leveraging the strengths and resources of all partners. Executive Order 13691, promoting private sector cybersecurity information sharing by President Barack Obama on February 13, 2015, lays the framework for partnerships and systems development for law enforcement, government entities, and the private sector to collaborate in the security of the nation's cyber systems. Further support includes FBI Law Enforcement Enterprise Portal, LEEP, and which centralizes many tools, resources, and training. Now, new and emerging threats, even though strides have been made, information sharing and counterterrorism efforts are still hampered by systems that are largely decentralized and not standardized, unfunded mandates and budgetary restraints, personnel gaps, and classification information intelligence. Furthermore, cyber attacks, exploitations of social media platforms, and legal issues challenge law enforcement capabilities. Decentralized, albeit there are many tools, public and private sector, whereby law enforcement may collect, analyze, develop, and share information intelligence, but they remain relatively decentralized. Fusion centers across the country are working hard to bridge this gap but the intelligence community mission still requires accessing several websites, software, and databases. Furthermore, there's so much data and information available that investigators oftentimes find it difficult to identify that which is relevant and actionable intelligence. One intelligence professional discussed how many of the intelligence bulletins entail several pages with limited new and actionable intelligence and stated that these needs to be condensed to critical information to avoid being overlooked. Many agencies have turned to varying systems offered from the private sector, which have great potential, yet do not interface with one another. These challenges slow state and local law enforcement identifying and responding to threats. Funding and personnel, I'm going to move through this very quickly due to time. Counterterrorism and intelligence capabilities require funding and personnel to keep pace with current and emerging threats. While the strategic plan to develop, encourage, and use public-private partnerships to counter threats and share information, the systems still require funding. Data information intelligence in many cases require security clearances, although numerous departments across the country are able to assign officers to task force, such as the FBI, Joint Terrorism Task Force, others do not have the personnel. Even with such assignments, briefings provided contain classified information that are limited upon how it may be used. I'm going to go right to what's more need to be done, if I could, Chairman, and with the time that I have left. But I want to talk here about systems. Intelligence information, analytical tools, databases, and other resources still require better centralization and simplification. Although improvements have been realized in collating information, intelligence, more is needed. My recommendation remains that intelligence sources, tools, and resources continue to merge and be centralized, providing for a one-stop site and dashboard where the intelligence community can access, investigate, analyze, share, and produce actionable intelligence. Simplification and reducing data overload is key. Standardizing intelligence systems to make them more interoperable can increase the speed of gathering, analyzing, and sharing data while simplifying the process of operators. Human intelligence will remain no matter how robust our systems develop, and these continue to need enhanced access to protected and classified information. Moving forward, we must find new avenues to increase the availability of protected intelligence to those in law enforcement and the speed by which it is provided. Declassification of materials, security clearances, and task force liaisons play a part, but developing an access or clearance level that would allow local departments better flow of information is needed. Training and educating state and local law enforcement to operate in cyber and high technology field has increased, including web-based suites of course through the FBI. These efforts should continue, increase, and involve a security clearance program that support local access to protected material. In summary, sir, there is no shortage of terrorist attacks we've seen in the last year and a half. To drive home the message that federal, state, and local law enforcement must effectively and efficiently share information and partner with the private sector to protect our nation. We're also experiencing a time in our nation where a real or perceived divide between law enforcement and the community exists. Better information flow and cooperation is also necessary for our communities. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm sorry I went on my time, sir, but if you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to try to entertain them for you.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. I wouldn't have even thought of interrupting you. My wife is from Georgia, and she wouldn't have spoken to me again if I had interrupted someone from Georgia, so thank you. Let me ask the question, and I don't ask this from the vantage point of Monday morning quarterbacking, but specifically to Chief Berry and generally to the entire panel. Using Orlando as an example, I understand the FBI closed out the investigation initially. Whether they should have or not, that's a judgment call. I'm not going to question that judgment. The reality is, though, that the FBI would not have the personnel to continue to monitor every individual that a case is opened on in the country. Do you believe that the JTTFs, though, should stay more in contact with local police so they could at least keep some general surveillance or monitoring of someone that a case was opened on, or at least an investigation was begun on, not enough to continue to keep the case going, but also there's still some smoke. There may not be fire, but there may be smoke, so that local police could still continue to monitor to the extent that they thought advisory. And also, is there sufficient cooperation between the JTTFs? Because you could have a large state with large populations, several JTTFs, and you could have suspects or individuals obviously crossing JTTF lines. Are the other local police informed of those individuals? So I'll start with Chief Berry as far as Orlando, and then open it up to the other two witnesses. Chief Berry.
Thank you, Chairman King. The answer to your question is, first, I have to say this, and I didn't put it in my testimony. I still haven't got my head around the fact that my hometown is the mass murder capital of the United States. I cannot believe that as I sit here in front of you in Washington, D.C. today, that my hometown has that dubious honor. And we hope that nobody else has to experience that. And our commitment is every one of our patrol cars now has this sticker on it, because 49 people died, and the American public has already forgotten the number of people that died. Now I'll answer your question. I had to say that because it's important for our community.
Absolutely.
The FBI offices, I can tell you in Orlando, where I'm a member of the JTTF and I have personnel assigned, does a great job of sharing information. They keep us in the loop. We have meetings. We're invited to their weekly meetings, so we have great intelligence sharing. I can't answer if that information was shared at the other office, because that investigation of the shooter in Orlando was done by the Miami office. I don't know if that was shared with those local police agencies or not, so it would not be appropriate for me to speculate. However, I would say this: hopefully, if it didn't happen, certainly going forward, I would hope that if the FBI closes out a couple of investigations, they would at least make those locals aware of that. I think the other missing gap here is when people start buying weapons and they're on that list, we certainly should know that that is happening. And I know there's a whole bunch of issues when it comes to guns, but if you have somebody that's been investigated as a possible terrorist and they're buying weapons, somebody needs to tell the cops, and then we'll take it from there. So thank you, and I look forward to other questions.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Senator?
You know, as far as the JTTF relationship with the, not just the fusion centers, but local and state law enforcement, I think that it has expanded to the point where we've got really good relationships in many parts of the country. Other parts, it's not as strong. And, as Dr. Alexander said, oftentimes it's based on relationships, and relationships that people have in the local community with the FBI, with the state law enforcement, with local law enforcement, the fusion center. All of that has to work together closely. And in my area, twice a week, we send out those suspicious activity reports where, if we're able to, the details to 13,000 law enforcement officers of who we're looking at. And that way they have context of what we're doing. They know what, what the subjects may be, but there are also privacy concerns that we also have to look at as well, because oftentimes with suspicious activity, people have not committed a crime. And we also have to, be cognizant of making sure that people understand that. But at least giving them the ability to have visibility is key. And we're doing across the country a lot better at that. Can we do better across the entire network? Yes. And it's mainly, we've got to move away from personality-based operations to a standard function that this is the way we do business. And unfortunately, it's taken us 15 years to get to this point. I actually think there needs to be, policies, and there needs to be legislation that encourages that level of cooperation and exchange of information. But on the backside of that, we also have to have responsibility that people protect the data and not disseminate it inappropriately, which can cause a lot of damage to the ability to investigate, collect intelligence, and also the ability for law enforcement officers to do their job.
Other police officials have mentioned that to me about legislation. Any thoughts you have on legislation? Because that could be tricky, but on the other hand, it may be, again, I don't know if that gets us into telling the FBI director how to do his job or not, but if you could give us some ideas on proposed legislation on that too, will greatly encourage that type of cooperation. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms.
Dr. Alexander, if you want to take that first and I can comment.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay.
That was you, yeah.
As far as the legislation encouraging, throughout the country, people receive, grant funding, or funding is delivered based on expectations that you will do some type of activity. Every time that we throw a hook out there that, in order to receive, your funding levels, you have to accomplish X, Y, Z. That is the mechanism, whether it be suspicious activity reporting, whether it be a willingness to share data, whether it be processed as so many clearances or so much access permissions, something along those lines, that if you want to receive your federal funding or your grants or whatever it may be, that there is a requirement that you have a duty to share information, that you have a duty as a fusion center to get that information out to those people in the field, you know, and that people in the field have an expectation that they should ask their centers, that they should ask the FBI for data, and that in return, when they ask for it, they should get it.
Thank you. Dr. Alexander. Is the microphone on there?
Yes, I'm sorry. There's one piece here that I did not get a chance to share in my opening statements, and if I could, sir, I'd like to read it.
Absolutely.
It's under funding and personnel. Counterterrorism and intelligence capabilities require funding and personnel to keep pace with current and emerging threats. While the strategic plan is to develop, encourage, and use public-private partnerships to counter threats and share information, the systems require funding. And I'll give you an example. As we discussed in February of 2015, the funding for the Georgia Terrorism Intelligence Project, GTIP, which we refer to it as, was reduced to $90,000, down from a $2.5 million DHS grant in 2007, and these cuts still remain today. One of the biggest challenges I think my two colleagues here would agree with me on, Chairman, is that with all the emerging threats certainly that we have seen over the last couple of years, with the threats that we know that are still relevant, that are out there today, with the amount of information that we are receiving and yet probably missing as well, is going to be critical, I believe, to the infrastructure and the public safety of our communities, particularly all our communities, but certainly the local communities in which myself, like Chief Berry, serve. And the more information that we're able to ascertain that is relevant to what may be pertinent to our communities, understanding that there's different levels of secrecy. But for us, at a very much of a local level, it becomes incumbent to have as much information as we have so that we can at least try to forecast, predict, prepare ourselves to what may potentially be the next threat. And we have to have funding to do that. And even though we struggle with the whole, this whole decentralized piece of information sharing, I think that's a challenge in and of itself, but JTTF and the FBI and others really have done a tremendous job in supporting local law enforcement. But at the end of the day, sir, it certainly does come down to funding, and it comes down to having the ability to keep up with all the latest technology that is continually evolving each and every day. Because one thing we know about the bad guys, whether they're domestic or foreign, many of them seem to have the same technological advantages sometimes that we do. They look at some of the same information that we do, and they prepare oftentimes as we do. So for us, it becomes critically important to have as much access to intelligence information, and that is guided, quite frankly, through being able to be funded so that we can work on some of these challenges that we know are constantly emerging in front of us, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. Ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for the work that you do. The fusion centers, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, it's always a question of resources, and it can never be enough. The more people that need to be investigated, the more people you need to fund relative to our law enforcement activities. When you get into these kinds of issues, in counterterrorism intelligence, you never get credit for what didn't happen. And, the whole emphasis is about preventing things from happening. So you do great work, and they do great work throughout our communities to keep everybody safe. But I just can't help but conclude, our big problem is guns. And, you look at Orlando. You had an individual for a time was on the FBI watch list, 49 people dead, 53 people wounded, one shooter. Semi-automatic rifle, semi-automatic pistol, legally purchased. Newtown, Connecticut, 20 kids dead between the ages of 6 and 7, first grade. Most of those kids had multiple wounds. 6 adults. Those adults were throwing themselves in front of the kids to try to protect them. The shooter also shot and killed his mother. Kid was thought to have very significant mental health issues. 16 mass shootings, 8 of the gunmen involved in those had criminal histories and documented mental health problems that did not prevent them from buying a gun. You know, why would any law-abiding citizen that invokes a constitutional right to bear arms as a responsible citizen, and the vast majority of gun owners in this country, I believe, are, why would they defend someone that has terrorist activity in their history to purchase a gun legally? You know, I understand the Second Amendment, but the framers of the Constitution could never have anticipated the kind of hell that was inflicted on innocent people in Orlando, in Newtown, and these other places where we've had gun violence. I would ask you to comment. I mean, you represent, at least 2 of you, you represent chiefs of police. We are allowing terrorists, people with mental health issues, they outgun the very police officers that take an oath to protect us. Now, I heard one response in the so-called defense of the Second Amendment, when the Newtown shooting occurred, that we should allow more guns in the school. That would have created a mass shootout. So I just, you know, in terms of our law enforcement officials, again, that take an oath to protect all of us, don't we at least have an obligation to them to ensure that they at least have a fighting chance in a situation where there's going to be a confrontation with some lunatic that legally buys a gun in this country? That's anti-American. That's anti-American. I'd ask you to comment.
Thank you, Congressman. On behalf of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, we have taken a very strong position on this through the years. We absolutely support expanded background checks. We support closing the gun show loophole. And just to put this in perspective, my wife recently just got married, and she had to get a new driver's license. And to get a new driver's license, she had to show her birth certificate, she had to get 2 utility bills, and a lease to get a driver's license. But somebody can get out of prison, go to a gun show, show no identification at all, and buy as many weapons as they want. Something's wrong with that, okay? And then it's the men and women that we represent that have to deal with that threat, okay? So we have been our association supports closing those loopholes and background checks. And the other thing that I have to tell you as a law enforcement officer, that we're seeing the incredible increases in violent crime. We're seeing more weapons than we've ever seen before, and the shootouts are going to continue. The only reason the homicide rate is not double what it is right now in this country is because of incredible medical care. If not, the homicide rate would be comparable to the 70s, which people like to talk about. That's a fact that I'm willing to stand on right here in front of you or anybody else. We have to do a better job.
Well said.
Yeah, yes, sir. And certainly I do wholeheartedly agree with my colleague, Chief Barrett. But let me say this. You know, a little over a year ago, I had 2 police officers respond to a call for service. And upon arrival to the scene, there were 2 bad guys that opened fire on them with long rifles. And they engaged in a shootout that lasted probably for about 3 or 4 minutes, and that is a very long time. They were armed at that time with, our officers were armed with 40 caliber handguns. One of the subjects was, had an AK-47, another one with an extended magazine on a handgun. Both officers were hit. One was severely hit in the thigh, the other one was hit in the lower leg. But they found each other and they stayed in the fight until backup officers got there. I can't tell you how angry that makes me, how scary that was for all of us, because we almost lost an officer who almost bled out, and who almost lost his leg. But thanks to medical science and Grady Hospital there, which is our trauma center there in Atlanta, they were able to save both of those officers. This is a real serious issue. When we start talking about gun control, I think most of us as Americans certainly do support the Second Amendment. I do. It's a constitutional right that we all have. But this whole idea of our right has somewhat gone amok in many cases, because oftentimes when I hear people talk about it, they usually talk out of both sides of their mouth. On one hand, they want gun control, but yet on the other hand, they don't. So I don't know which is which. And I understand the strong lobbying of the NRA and the impact that it has on this country as it relates to gun control. But this is a real serious problem for us. And quite frankly, if we go back and look at some of the prior shootings across this country, people who had no history of any involvement in any type of terrorist group, who just came out of nowhere, whether they were a college student or whomever they may have been, there was no signs, because the accessibility, quite frankly, of weapons are so easy in this country, and the greatest majority of the people, you're right, Chairman, that own firearms in this country are law-abiding citizens. But we also know that at any given moment, any law-abiding citizen, because of stressors that may impose on him or her life, or life takes a different course and people lose themselves, and if they have accessibility to a weapon, they could use it in a deadly way. But it's not those who rightfully own these weapons that I'm concerned about. It's the millions of weapons that are stolen from cars and homes every year that go reported and oftentimes not reported, and find themselves on the streets of American cities. And you can take a city like Chicago, Illinois, for an example, and I think is a perfect example. The number of guns that they take off the street on a daily basis, but yet the number of killings that take place is just unimaginable. But yet we as a nation, quite frankly, still have not done anything, I don't think, wholly to really address this whole gun issue. So we're going to have to decide which way do we want this. We want to exercise our Second Amendment rights, but at the same time, too, there's going to have to be some real hard decisions and legislation made. Maybe it will be under the next presidential administration. I don't know. But we keep talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. When I think about Connecticut and I think about those small babies that lost their lives, I mean, it almost brings tears to my eyes, even to this moment, because it's sad and it's shameful, but it goes on every day in this country still. It just doesn't happen in one place in a schoolhouse. It happens across communities, across cities, and across the country. So I don't know the answer to that question. I think we all can talk about it and, ad nauseum, but the reality of it is that as a nation, we're going to have to find a way to even hold those that are responsible gun owners, and that's me and a whole bunch of us, but we got to make sure that we keep the possessions of those weapons somewhere that's secure, that's locked, whether in our homes, in our cars, or whatever, and try to minimize the likelihood of those weapons being stolen, because those are the weapons that are hurting people, those that are being stolen, not from the guy who lives in my neighborhood or your neighborhood who goes down to the local gun shop and shows his identification and purchases a weapon either for protection or for recreation. It's those weapons that get away from us oftentimes and get into the wrong hands.
the comments I'd like to add from the Fusion Center perspective. 4 years ago, when started talking with the Terrorist Screening Center about the issue of known or suspected terrorist encounters that we were not being notified about, that was one of those encounters groups. Reason being, they said, was the attorneys from TSC and the folks representing them, and they're fantastic partners, but they said, we can't share this with you because it's a Second Amendment right that they can buy these. Even if we know they're have a belief from the law enforcement perspective that this person is a terrorist. And I was just shocked, just dumbfounded. Not having that information from a local officer or state officer that a person that we believe is engaged in criminal activity and under investigation and not know about it, it puts us in a bad position. And especially when we're talking about long guns. A long gun to a handgun is not a fair fight, and most law enforcement officers in America have handguns. They can't defend themselves against that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in closing, I would just say, firstly, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your professionalism. Your perspective on this issue, to me, has massive street credibility. And, we give fast-track authority for trade deals. We should give our law enforcement professionals and leaders fast-track authority in developing common sense gun control, gun safety measures, because unless and until we do that, we're going to be back here year after year, and we're going to just be talking about the most recent massive shooting that occurred. And unfortunately, the further away you get from these incidents, these victims are forgotten. So I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, Chairman Katko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your comments, gentlemen. For 20 years, I was a federal prosecutor, and I had the great pleasure working with state and local law enforcement on a regular basis in El Paso and in Puerto Rico and in upstate New York. And I was always struck by the importance of having the state and local components on the federal task forces. And maybe the FBI didn't always agree with me, but I really felt that they were critically important. They brought a level of investigatory expertise that you don't always have. I mean, sometimes the local guys can just find that informant you need on the street or whatever to make your gang case or make your organized crime case, and it's critically important. So I have a fundamental understanding of task forces and the good and bad of them. It's troubling to me to hear you say, Mr. Senna, that we still have this TS top secret, security clearance issue. And so I wonder if you could expound on it for a minute, because it's frustrating to me. If you have state and local law enforcement that are willing to augment these task forces and are willing to put up bodies in this time of great budgetary constraints, and in a time of great pressure on the federal law enforcement through the expansion of these ISIS investigations tenfold, maybe times more than that, why is it taking so long, in your opinion, to get these clearances done? Makes no sense to me.
It has been painful. I have one manager in my office that can't actually sit with the team that he manages for the past 8 months because he's waiting for a clearance. It makes it difficult for us to operate. Some of it is related to the violation into the systems, for background checks that was done a few years back, and they're backlogged. But it is a slow process. And the other complication in this is DHS recently has gone to getting TS clearances for folks, but the SCI caveat has to be done by an organization such as the FBI to give up their information. So what we're running into, and this is the bizarre circumstance, we started out with getting secret clearances for our folks, and then they have to go through a whole new process to get a TS clearance from the FBI or SCI clearance. It's a convoluted process. I know General Taylor over at DHS-INA has been very proactive in moving this forward to actually allow us for the first time for DHS to get TS clearances. But my clearance is through the FBI, and it was back when it was done a much smoother process. But we're still this time lag. If a person can't do their job for 8 months to a year, and they're assigned to a task force, you're half a man down, basically.
No, I understand that. Like, we had the same problem. Just my interns in OSADEF cases, they couldn't even get access to the OSADEF information because until halfway through the summer, because they had to get security clearances for a student intern. It's so frustrating. Absolutely. But now we understand the problem here, and we did pass some legislation to hopefully address this. But what have any of you gentlemen suggest that we can do to get this going? I mean, is it just a matter of dollars and cents to get more bodies at FBI doing these background checks so we can get them done in a more expedited manner, or what is it?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that's something that the FBI would want just as much as we do. But the protocols that are set in place are set in place, so that may require some new changes in rules and policies and so forth. But the criticalness of it is in the here and now, because here's what we know about the threats that are out there and the threats that are emerging. These are local threats, sir, as you've indicated, that are actually coming from our communities. Because the threats, whether it's recruitment of young people in communities across this country, they're coming from the streets of America. So if kids or young people or we have threats that have come into this country through other avenues, they're on the streets of this country. And if they're going to be noticed, found, investigated first, someone knows. Someone is seeing something or hearing something that is very unusual. And it starts from the local communities. It doesn't start up here. It starts from local communities.
And that's part of what we tried to address with the
Right.
countering violent extremism, getting
right.
people into the communities to help intervene before
Absolutely.
they break terror.
Right, but to Mr. Cena's point, we got to have authorities and those in the law enforcement community who have immediate access to information and be able to share that information as quickly as we can, because so much is happening
Right.
so fast.
Right, and
so,
that goes to my second question,
Yeah.
really, the accessing the databases, which is really frustrating to me to
Right.
hear that. How the heck have you guys, if you get your security clearances, why are you having a hard time accessing these databases? I know you guys are, I know it's so frustrating for you, you probably want to scream, but it's maddening to me if the information is there and the guys with boots on the ground out on the street who have the security clearances, why don't they have access to these databases?
Here's one of the hard issues that we have. So we have programs like the RISC program, been around for over 40 years for deconfliction services, watch center service, HIDA program since 1988, fusion centers, a lot of them after 9/11. They're programs. So when we go to get access to some services, they go, well, you're a program, you're not an agency. And because of that, we cannot, there's nothing written in the CFRs and the Code of Federal Regulations that defines our programs as having access to that type of data. So they'll say, well, that one person in your organization, because they come from that police department or that agency, can have access, but the rest of you, if he's not there, you're on your own. And that's what we're seeing in some locations.
That's despite the fact that they all have the same security clearance?
Absolutely.
That's madness to me. That's absolute madness.
Yes, sir.
And if you trust them to have the security clearance, you trust them to have access to the information, am I correct? Or,
That's correct.
all right, so how can we fix that?
The only way I can see now, because we have tried through policy, we have tried through discussion with various organizations about how do we make this happen, and even then the ideas are at best half-baked. Well, we'll get an agency to sponsor you. We'll go to the chief's department and say, can we get you to sponsor us?
It sounds like there's a fundamental fix that we can do legislatively. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my staff contact you folks and get your input, and then let's work collaboratively to try and fix this.
That sounds great, sir.
Okay.
We'd really appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you all, gentlemen. My heart bleeds for Orlando. I mean, and anywhere in this great country of ours where things like this are happening. But the cold, hard reality is in all 50 states in this great country, we have ISIS investigations, and we have big investigations. We have task forces getting stretched to the hilt. And to think that in this time of great stress that we can't even share the information for people who have the security clearances is maddening. So we got to do our job, and we will. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Katko yields back, and Mr. Keating, gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. This is a critical dialogue that we're having. As a former DA myself, I worked a lot with the chiefs. In fact, I worked with your successor, Chief Barry, I think, Terry Cunningham in Massachusetts. And those dialogues at that level were important. In fact, we met regularly. So I would just say to all of you, at least individually, and I think for the committee, if you have information that you think could be helpful to us, suggestions, not just after this hearing, but on an ongoing basis, feel free to call my office and share that information. It's important information. And then we'll try and unravel so many roadblocks. I mean, how can the federal agencies, for instance, share information, or the FBI share information that they don't have sometimes? After Orlando, Senator Nelson on the Senate side, myself on the House side, we put in legislation so that the FBI, when they're investigating terrorists, and then they have to close the case because of the structure that's there, if that person later tries to purchase a weapon, at least they should be notified at the federal level. I'd like you to comment on that legislation, because if they don't have the information themselves, how can they share it?
Thank you, Congressman. You bring up one of the fallacies of the system, and when it comes to firearms purchases, that's another whole, as I talked about, some of the challenges that are there. I can't get my head around, as a police chief, that you can be on a terrorist watch list and legally purchase a weapon. I mean, if we can't fix that, I'm not sure where we're going with the rest of it. But again, I'm not sure what the fix is to that, but I would certainly hope that there's got to be some kind of communication on the federal level, and then through our joint terrorism task forces, it would get down to us on the local level. I certainly hope that happens, but again, if we can't fix the watch list, I think that one's glaring, and we should jump on that first, and then we'll go from there.
And this doesn't even stop the purchase of the gun. It just gives the authorities the information that's being done, information that if they had that information as they're doing the investigation, could have made a great difference. So,
correct. I think would have made an incredible difference based on those people that I know at the FBI that we work with on a daily basis, and those personnel that we have assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. I think it would have made an incredible difference. I believe that.
I also think from the bottom up, having access, and I just want to follow up regarding the clearance issue too. I mean, what is the expense on the local departments? How are you getting some of the money for that, as well as just the roadblocks that are there administratively? Is that an issue too, or do you need more resources to do that?
As far as the clearances themselves, the process goes through, for us, mainly FBI and Department of Homeland Security. So they take care of the processing piece. It's just it takes so long right now for those clearances often to come through. And you'll have some that'll take 90 days. You'll have some that'll take a year. It's, you know, no real rhyme or reason, but, you know, I always feel like it is a lack of resources and the ability to do these clearances that need to get done.
And beyond the local and county law enforcement people getting clearance, do you want to comment too? We've had testimony before on the data analysts at the fusion centers having clearance. How important is that? Because they're working with that data all the time. They don't have clearance to.
Absolutely, that's critical. If they don't have the clearance, we can't tell them the context that what they're working on could potentially have. It's very painful. The other piece of that is, you know, we've struggled over the years. We've worked tremendously with the FBI Office of Partner Engagement, Carrie Sleeper's team, to try to figure out how do we get the analysts the data from FBInet. You know, a lot of the holdings that are about terrorism are in that system.
Yes.
So we can get a task force officer, so it's a sworn law enforcement officer, we can get him FBInet access, but we have yet to figure out how can we get the analysts who need the data more often than the officers to give them the information to do their job in the field. Yeah. It's really been heartbreaking for us to struggle so long. And we had an initiative, National Mission Cell Initiative, which is actually turned into the Enhanced Engagement Initiative, which the primary goal of that was to figure out how do we get access to the analysts of those systems and how we give them the training. And to date, over a year, we haven't got to that point yet.
It's not a new issue. The other thing I just want to just highlight as an issue and get your comments, I hope, is the fact that the effectiveness of the the CVE, for lack of a better term, that training, how helpful that is. But also, I know, you know, we're trying to do this in my home state and around the country, but just to get a sense in terms of reaching out to communities, reaching out to the Muslim community, reaching out, you know, and making them more empowered to be a partner in sharing information. That's critical at the root level, and there has to be a trust that's built, but that trust is important, and it's also the access is going to mostly come from local law enforcement building those bridges. Can you tell us some of the progress, some of the roadblocks, how you're doing across the country? Because without that, we're shutting off an important source of information and a dialogue that has to be continued.
Absolutely. If my colleagues don't mind me taking that first.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. The CVE, and it started for us with Building Communities of Trust, which was a DHS and Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Assistance program, where we actually went out to the communities and started trying to build those relationships. And I got to tell you, the first meeting we had was probably about the roughest experience I've had in my life. Folks with no trust for law enforcement, trust, was not even talked about. It was, we don't trust you from the beginning of this meeting. And that's kind of flourished to the point where today, this afternoon actually, we're doing a seminar with groups that probably have never been given a voice in our public safety community, from the Council on American Islamic Relations to Islamic Network Group to the Muslim Public Advocacy Committee. These groups are now going to do a presentation to law enforcement on what they see CVE, what they see as Islamophobia, and what they see as ISIS from their perspective. We do a lot of things in government from the top end. That doesn't work.
Right.
We have to engage the community and hear their voice and what their concerns are. And one of the things that they had a concern about is hate crimes. So we added onto our website portal and our ability on the mobile application that they could click on hate crimes. So they can take that application out and give it to their community so they can report things. We tell them first, make sure you call your local law enforcement, but we're good with secondary reporting, or if you have a fear of reporting, just click on that application to tell us. And right next to that is our suspicious activity reporting. So that way, if someone in their community sees something that fits the characteristics of those suspicious behavior, they can report that too. It's a huge leap for us, enormous. But it's been slow. It's taken us several years to do this. But here's the problem we hear across the country. The communities that we're trying to talk to about CVE don't want to talk to us about CVE. They want to talk about the crimes they see. They want to talk about the hate crimes. They want to talk about the issues they have in their community. They want to talk about law enforcement and violence in their community. Those are their issues. And we need to address those in order to get that conversation going about how to identify violence in their communities.
That's a great point, Doctor.
Yes, sir. It becomes hugely important with all the negative anti-Muslim rhetoric that we've heard over recent years to engage our Muslim community. And in DeKalb County, we have well over 700,000 residents, and we have an extremely large Muslim community in and around DeKalb County. So what we did, and what is critically important in bridging these relationships, even though oftentimes we think of doing them after something happens, what's really important that people feel a sense that you're really genuine in what you're asking in terms of building that relationship. So for us, right after San Bernardino, it came to mind for me to bring in the Muslim community in DeKalb County to sit down and talk with their leadership. And I ended up, through one imam, having about a dozen imams throughout the whole Atlanta metro community that showed up, along with my staff and a number of other chiefs that are in my county as well, too, where we have a number of small cities in our county. So it provided an opportunity to them to talk about their fears and the threats they have been receiving, their children had been receiving post-San Bernardino event. And so it gave us an opportunity to share with them our commitment to their safety as we would any other American citizen. And they also committed to us that if they hear something or see something, that they would call us. And true to form, not long after that meeting, they began to share information with us that we gave to the FBI for their follow-up. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. But it has to be done in a very genuine way. And it has to be done in a way that people don't feel where you're just reaching out to me being nice because this occurred and you want to know if something happened in your backyard.
Yeah, I think that, lastly, I'm over my time, but just my own experience, what you're saying is so important. We did, in our county, when I was DA, we did civil rights training for law enforcement, but we did it regularly. We didn't do it just after a crisis. And I want to say this, because it's my experience as well. I come from a police family. The willingness of local police to participate and be a part of this was just so strong. And I think it should be said publicly in given all the that's occurring and the rhetoric around the country. This is something that if it's there and they can participate, police want to do this. It's for their own safety, but they're committed to the safety of their community. So I just couldn't agree with you more that let's just not do these things in the wake of a tragedy. Let's do it on an ongoing basis, and I think you have the willingness of the public and these community groups as well as the police to make it successful. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
I'd like to thank my friend and the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts for his questions and his years of commitment to this issue. I'm now going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. Gentlemen, good to see you all again. I think last time we were here, we were talking about overclassification, and it seems that this issue has not been resolved. And this is something that has to be resolved to make sure we get the right information in the right hands. I think what your brothers and sisters in arms have to deal with, whether it's an active shooter, we're dealing with one possibly right now in Alpine, Texas, small town in West Texas that I represent, is difficult. And I want to make sure that your brothers and sisters in arms have all the information that they need. Earlier in some of y'all's testimony, you were talking about a lack of cyber preparedness, and I think everybody hit on that. I'm curious, can we dig a little deeper, and what should happen? What kind of information are you all looking for, and where do you think that can come from? And let's start with you, Chief Barry.
Well, what I found, thank you, sir, what I found is good leadership delegates, and I would delegate that to Mr. Senna. I think he is in a unique position from the Fusion Center Network to talk about a more global aspect.
Mr. Santa.
Thank you, Congressman Hurd. When we started looking at the issues of cyber, you know, we drew back on kind of what we looked at in our approach to suspicious activity reporting and how we create a unified message that, you know, if you see something suspicious, say something, call someone, you know, call local law enforcement. Local law enforcement will pass that information to the FBI and JTTF and to their fusion centers. When we look at the world of who do you report a cyber threat to, the closest thing we get has five different people on it that you need to contact. That makes it a little difficult, although there's a lot more cross-communication between those 5 different areas that you could potentially call, depending on what type of event it is. But we still need to have more of a unified process around the country of how an attack, how an incident is reported.
Right. And honestly, we've tried to address that issue with the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, making Department of Homeland Security the belly button for this level of cooperation. If you have the fortunate opportunity to be at a fusion center, you know, you're going to be able to still go to the Bureau and you know, sometimes Secret Service, depending on the information. And we don't want to prevent and the existing lines of cooperation that may already be happening, but where there is none, Department of Homeland Security is supposed to be the belly button. And we're also working when it comes to the reorganization of the entity within Department of Homeland Security that deals with cybersecurity, making it an operational unit. It already is, let's be frank, but we got to make sure that they have the proper structure to do that and to ensure that there's individuals there that are working with state and local folks on this level of cooperation. And so, but we can't just talk about sharing between the federal government and local law enforcement. We need to be talking about private sector as well, because they're the ones that are seeing a bulk of these attacks, and we can be learning from them. And these are, you know, potential analysts that local law enforcement and state entities could be using. And so, has there been talk, you know, the integration of private sector entities within some of these fusion centers when it comes to cyber information sharing?
Actually, there has been. We have centers where there are folks in the private sector that have come in with this type of expertise. Virtual collaboration. We have a cyber intelligence network that we've created. You know, analysts from around the country that can get online, use a HISN, you know, cyber intelligence network tool that we have, and that way they can exchange information in real time of what threats they're seeing. Because you're absolutely right. The people that are more able to see the threat is oftentimes the private sector. By the time that a law enforcement agency sees the threat, their computers are already locked up and everything's become a brick. At that point, it's too late. But what we want to be able to do is, when somebody sees the threat, share that information with others. But also, the hygiene part is incredibly important.
Excellent.
The fact that, you know, someone within an organization, it just takes the weakest link, clicks on whatever spear phishing that may be out there, somebody sending an email going, hey, I'm your long-lost brother, I'm going to send you some money, or whatever it may be, clicks on that link and infects an entire computer. We recently had that where it took out an entire agency, and not a large agency, and took out their dispatch services,
Right.
and that's happening across America.
And one of the things that's important for me specifically is when y'all have specific examples where the information sharing works and when it's a problem, understanding those specific examples, because if we can solve that problem for that individual instance, then we can figure out how to solve it in the future. But in this case, we need to have granular understanding, and I'm deep in the weeds on this issue, and so y'all's feedback and positive and negative going forward would be helpful. And there's two issues I want to address in the time I do not have. And one is this issue about suspicious activity behavior. If we suspicious activity and suspicious behavior, if we use the example of the Orlando shooter, the Orlando killer, excuse me, he cased a number of locations that had private security there. Are our private security folks, are they trained to detect suspicious activity? Are they filling out suspicious activity reports? If a private sector security service has a suspicious activity, where does it go? Does local law enforcement see that? Because the reality is, I think when dealing with these lone wolf attacks of folks that have never been on the radar before, the way that we're going to figure it out is disrupt them when they're doing the casing operations. And guess who's going to disrupt it? The two of y'all. You know, the folks that y'all represent. And so is that process ongoing? How does that get integrated into the Fusion Center? Because I would describe these as micro-intelligence networks, that we're gathering this information on the ground, and then how do we connect it to some of the national intelligence? And maybe Dr. Alexander, have you go first, and then Chief Barry, and then Mr. Senna, you wrap it up.
I think that's a great question, Congressman, because and maybe Chief Barry has a different perspective on it. My perspective is, in a lot of these establishments, such as the Pulse nightclub, for an example, we have thousands of those across this country, hundreds of them in some communities across this country as well. And they all have security at the front door, if you will. So if you were to ask, are they trained to detect certain behaviors and so forth? No, they probably are not. And so even where you have police officers who may be working off-duty jobs at some of these establishments, they have a little bit better insight because of the training that they have. But if they're not careful and become very lax in that very social kind of environment, they themselves can find themselves very much at risk. But to your question, I think it's something to really think about on a national perspective is how do we train such establishments, if you will, to how do we help them train, or how do we train, whether we do it locally through JTTF or some law enforcement agency, to train security personnel that maybe at nightclubs, if you're going to do it for nightclubs, now you got to do it for restaurants, you got to do it for theaters, you got to do it virtually.
Malls, grocery stores.
Yeah, you got to do it everywhere. So it has to be a training that's across the board that heightens everyone's awareness to the environment that we live in today, that we all need to be very thoughtful, very mindful, and very watchful of our environment, but doing it in a way where we don't hamper the democracy of people who like to move through a free society such as we do, but do it and train it in a way in which we all are very thoughtful that, because this is a new way of doing business in this country when it comes to that. The other piece I want to back up, and if you would allow me, sir, for a moment, you were talking about the investment of our corporations or private industry being involved in this whole security piece. The private sector has a huge investment in making sure that our nation's security remains safe. They're the infrastructure of this nation. And oftentimes when we've had to call on them in the state of Georgia, for an example, the Southern Company, Georgia Power, and we call on them for support or for information or provide us with supports that we don't have access to, they've been very willing to do so. So the point is, I think if we ask more of our private industry partners in our communities to take part in this whole enforcement piece and watchful eye of things that are going on, and being able to work with us through our intelligence gathering and sharing what's intelligence that would be relevant for them as civilians, I think is going to strengthen this country as a whole. So I certainly do support that wholeheartedly.
Thank you, sir. Chief?
Thanks, Congressman. In particular with the pulse killer, it's still an active investigation, so I need to kind of dance around some of what I'm going to say. But it's very clear from what I know that this individual had cased other locations. And it was because of a change in a security footprint at those locations that that individual probably moved to another target. So changing your security stance occasionally is a good thing. And of course, at the university setting, we do that regularly with football and large-scale events. So we know that works. In Orlando, we have ILOs, Intelligence Liaison Officers. And those ILOs are not just law enforcement officers. They are people that work for those private corporations that are vetted, and they feed that information into our Central Florida Intelligence Exchange. So we do have that network. We've had it in place for many years, and it's not just private sector. It's on the fire side. We've expanded that out. Is there incredibly renewed interest? Absolutely. Then we get into that whole challenge, which we've talked about before. It's funding for our intel centers, our fusion centers, and then those clearances that those people need. So there are systems in place, and they do work, and we know they work. But again, I agree with Dr. Alexander. We probably need to come up with some kind of standard training that's vetted so it's proper and that we don't violate people's constitutional rights, and share that with more private sector companies that are looking at enhancing their security operations.
Mr. Senate, in your response, I'm going to add another question to you. If an outside entity is willing to pay for the security investigation to get clearances, shouldn't that speed the process? And what is the barrier that is preventing that from happening?
To start off on the security question, there's right now no real mechanism to allow the FBI or DHS to accept money from a private entity, and that's probably one of the bigger problems that they have. If they were going to pay for play, and I get a quicker investigation if I pay, there's nothing like that that exists right now. And I don't even know if it'd ever be possible to do that.
Well, there's a program called the 559 program on the border. It's really hard. I've learned in my 20 months in Congress, it's really hard to give something for free to the federal government. And there has been examples where we do that on infrastructure along the border. And I think there's a model for that public-private partnerships where you know, who's the entity? Who is the person that makes that decision?
Well, that would be FBI and DHS security that would make that
Gotcha.
decision.
Any final thoughts?
I did want to add that question on the liaison officer piece and how do you engage the critical infrastructure, and it is that piece. The ILOs, give them that direction. The one thing that we've gotten a lot of good press on, I should say, and it's unfortunate that the way we get it is every time there's an attack. They put on the news, they say, hey, this is how you submit a SAR. If you're critical infrastructure folks, this is how you push the button and you can put the information in or call right away. But that is the key. There's got to be some place, some easy mechanism for those people in private security forces to pass that information to us. And they do daily. We have about 1,000 people. But the other part of that is we need to be able to push data to them as well. So there has to be the ability from the federal government, from fusion centers to send that. And we are doing that to 1,000 people that are really the directors of and managers of the private security forces.
Well, gentlemen, I could sit here for another 15 or 30 minutes and continue this conversation. I just want to add or end with thank you all for what you do. Please thank your members and the people that you represent. You have an incredibly difficult job, and thanks for keeping us safe. And again, I appreciate your valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask for you to respond to these in writing. And pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.